Govan, I mean, it's a mountain that Shamila Batohi has to climb, just in terms of restoring the credibility of the NPA. These two senior officials in particular, how does she navigate this issue?
It certainly is a mountain for her to climb, and she'd have to navigate it by first sorting out the NPA's national issues and then moving towards the provinces. As you can see now, the inquiry is still ongoing, and they're hearing testimony from Advocate Simpiwe Mlotshwa. He's the former acting director of public prosecutions in KZN. That position was held by Shamila Batohi. And today he's basically told of how Nomgcobo Jiba's influence in cases was not only limited to national issues, that he found himself under pressure to sign an indictment against the Cato Manor unit of the Hawks by Nomgcobo Jiba, and he refused to do so because he had not been furnished with information about that case, and that happened just 6 months after Shamila Batohi went to the International Criminal Court. So it does seem as if the allegations against Jiba are not limited to the national office, but there are other cases that she also had influence over in the provinces. But first and foremost, of course, the testimony of the people that have appeared here at this inquiry would have to be considered by the president, and he would have to determine whether or not Jiba and Mkhwebi are fit to hold office. Whether or not Shamila Batohi would want to continue running the NPA with Jiba and Mkhwebi is still unclear at this stage. But from this inquiry, it's clear that there's a lot of damning evidence and testimony against the pair. And most of the senior prosecutors in the NPA actually believe that they are unfit to hold office and they should no longer be part of the organization.
I mean, at this point, we're just speculating on how she will sort of kick off her tenure as the country's first female head of the NPA. If we look back at Shaun Abrahams' tenure, I mean, he had one high-profile case that he worked on, and that was the case of the then finance minister. Willie Hofmeyer, another deputy at the NPA, he talks about the anti-corruption task team at the NPA identifying 80 cases, not a single one of those cases prosecuted. What do you know about perhaps some of the analysis on what she should do? We haven't heard from her. They've, of course, refused to give any interviews until she begins her job at the NPA today, which is, of course, the 1st of February. But what's the analysis saying? Well,
the analysis at this point points towards the cases which were actually shelved during the tenure of Nomgcobo Jiba and Lawrence Mkhwebi. As you said, Willie Hofmeyer pointing to those 80 cases at the corruption task team within the NPA, but we also heard of foreign bribery cases, and then also cases such as, which include Bosasa, the Richard Mdluli matter, and other cases related to Kumba iron ore. So it does seem as if during the tenure of Nomgcobo Jiba and Lawrence Mkhwebi, there were a lot of cases which were just left up in the air, and decisions to decline to prosecute were sharply disagreed with by some of the top prosecutors, including the likes of Jan Ferreira and Glenys Breitenbach, and of course Willie Hofmeyer. So when coming into office, Shamila Batohi would be faced with these prosecutors still holding these strong views, as they've told the Mahori inquiry, about these high-profile cases, and still maintaining that some of these politicians and senior business people do have a case to answer. So she would have to take a few tough decisions on whether or not she'd leave those cases to the status that they are right now, or whether she wants to resurrect some of those cases. Remember that we've seen a pattern developing with the national directors of public prosecutions. Shaun Abrahams, when he came in, the first thing that he did was withdraw those charges of fraud and perjury against Nomgcobo Jiba, defending her, whereas we saw Olisi Ngasana, the first thing he did when he came in was request dockets relating to the Jacob Zuma matter, relating to the spy tapes matter as well. So we do know that once an NDPP comes into office, they do preoccupy them with certain cases, and it would be interesting to see which cases Shamila Batohi asks for first, which dockets she asks for, and which prosecutors she decides to meet with first. Because, of course, there are a number of outstanding cases at the Specialized Commercial Crimes Unit, which is currently headed by Lawrence Mkhwebi. And the same can be said for the Directorate of Public Prosecutions across the country, where we've seen prosecutors showing up at the inquiry saying that they have this caseload, which includes high-profile cases, which urgently needs to be addressed. But as you said, at this point, it would be speculating to say which area she would focus on first.
I mean, Govan, she's fighting against not only factors within the NPA, corrupt factors and people within the NPA, but also within the SAPS. I'm just reading an article at the moment which talks about her perhaps sort of creating a division that is a structure quarantined outside of the NPA itself, in fact, and of the SAPS, sort of getting the right people into that structure and tackling corruption cases from that point of view.
Yeah, one of the big debates here at the Mahoro inquiry is whether or not the NPA should have the power to investigate further without the police actually assisting them in terms of high-profile cases. And that's a very delicate matter because, of course, the Hawks and the NPA work very closely when it comes to investigating high-profile cases. And later on today, we'll also hear from Colonel Kobus Rulofse. He's the former investigating officer in that Richard Mdluli matter, so a colonel in the Hawks. So he'll talk about how the relationship between the police and the NPA has affected certain prosecutions, but whether or not the NPA would move to establish such a unit which could insulate itself from interference by the police or the prosecutorial services is unclear at this stage. I think that, if anything, this Mahoro inquiry is explaining exactly or setting out exactly what the prosecution's policy is in the NPA and how effective that has been. Some of the stumbling blocks have most certainly been the cooperation between the police and the NPA. At one point, we also heard testimony about how police officers had disagreed with the attempts to charge high-profile politicians. So it seems as if there have been clashing of heads between the NPA and the police at other times. But when we look at the Richard Mdluli case, and Colonel Rulofse is expected to testify here later, that's also an example of how the police and the NPA have worked well together. So Shamila Batohi has some hard decisions to make about how she will approach the relationship between the Hawks and the NPA going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you'll continue to keep track of the Mahoro Commission of Inquiry for us. Our reporter Govan Whittles on the line to us there.